Thank you for joining Literally Alive. My name is Robert Diamante, and I am pleased to be joined by Gillian Burnes, editor and contributor to the new Littoral Books anthology, Positivity Bias, Maine Writers' Defiantly Happy Endings. With us are other writers from the anthology, Kaylie Borden O'Brien, Gerry Boyle, Art Dingley, Madison Ellingsworth, and Eleanor Morse. Dave Patterson and Lynn Seifert could not make it tonight. So, welcome, writers. Hello, everyone. And we have a full night of fun in front of us. So, we're going to dive right in. Gillian, tell us what prompted you to put this anthology together.
Sorry about that. The little notice telling us that we were being recorded covered my mute button. What brought this about? Agnes Bushell, the editor of and publisher at Littoral Books, approached me, I think it was December of 2024, and asked if I would be interested in editing an anthology of short stories. And right away, I knew what I wanted. If anybody remembers what was going on in December of 2024, a lot of us were reacting to what we thought was going to be a happy ending. Turned out not to be politically for a lot of us. And so uh, I asked if I could come up with my own theme, and she said, probably, let me hear what you have in mind. And selfishly, I just said, stories with happy endings. I need some stories with happy endings. And they're a little bit hard to find. It might be that there's something about, short stories which are small that don't allow a lot of characters to exist. So they tend to be about, one lonely person or a slice of life in which, something very simple, fades to black. And I wanted some short stories where the author pushes the rock back uphill, where things turn out in the end, and stories with some literary heft, something that would be really satisfying to read, but won't, rip our hearts out and stomp on them. And she said, "Oh, okay." And so it was pure selfishness, but I definitely got what I wanted.
Let's
Pardon
get
my
to some reading,
animals.
but I'm hoping we'll have time at the end so that the conversation can lead into some of the stories um, and how that diversity of happy endings sort of played out because they really are quite diverse in the anthology. So let's just jump right into the readings, and we're going to start with one of our writers who is deceased, Nick Bushell. And I felt very strongly we needed to represent him in tonight's reading. Would you read um, what's in the bio section from
Sure.
Agnes?
So this is from Agnes Bushell. Her son is the author. And the story is called She's the One. She's the One is an excerpt from my son's unfinished novel, Monkey. I borrowed the title from a song by the Ramones, who are referenced in the story. I don't know how Nick intended the plot of Monkey to develop, but he was enough of a romantic to give his two characters, if not a final happy ending, at least this momentary one. And Robert, you'll read some of the story?
She's the One. Some people would say that the words waiter and server are synonymous, or at least that the latter is simply a more polite way of referring to the former. In my short career in the culinary industry, I discovered an unmistakable difference between the two: surrender. A waiter or waitress is someone who is doing it to make money until their real career takes off, or until they figure out what their real career is going to be. A server, on the other hand, is someone resigned to a career waiting tables. They're lifers, and they hate being referred to as waiters, as if there's more dignity in the term server. I understood this, and Sherry understood this. Sherry was the only waitress working that night, and most other nights. We spent a lot of time together in that virtually deserted kitchen with nothing else to do but drink whiskey and mock our coworkers. All that time, and we barely knew each other. I knew she was an art school dropout and that she was from Buffalo, but that was about it. She knew even less about me. She didn't know how I came to work in this Portland shithole or why the management took such good care of me. I don't think she really cared. We were just two young people. She was 19 and I was 21, 22, stuck in a shitty job until we could figure out what we were really going to do with our lives. Or at least, that's what we told ourselves. Thank you. All right. First up, Madison Ellingsworth. Hi, Madison. So I understand you are going to read from Bait. You might want to unmute yourself. Bait, a husband, a wife, a transformation. Let me just start before you start reading. If you
Mhm.
don't have the book yet, there's some wonderful little blurbs underneath each title. That's kind of an introduction to each one of the stories. I think it was a brilliant move on the part of the designer Lori Harley, and it's a really fun addition to the book. Madison, take it away with Bait.
Thank you. Um, Bait. Tony and Beth are retired and married. Tony likes to wink and Beth has calloused hands. They live in a cottage in a mountain village. Their village has a convenience store, a hardware store, and a post office. "What's on the menu?" Tony says to Beth when he comes in through the cottage door. Beth can hear their weather-beaten forerunner settling on the gravel drive. It is evening and the sun has already set behind the mountain. Tony took longer than usual at the village convenience store today. He used to be a mailman, but now he makes extra money by raising worms. He sells his worms to the woman who owns the convenience store. The woman's name is Sue. "How was Sue today?" Beth says to Tony after she has told him the menu. "Squash and beans like every other night." Beth is a gardener, but she only likes to grow squash, beans, and a few herbs. "Cheerful," Tony replies. He joins her at the table and takes a bite of the tray bake that Beth has made. It is drizzled with balsamic glaze and sprinkled with dried rosemary from the garden. "Mmm, Tony moans. "Best dinner ever." He gives his wife a wink and takes another bite. Beth smiles and chews some squash. She does not care that Sue was cheerful because she thinks that Sue is young and sleazy, but Beth keeps her feelings to herself. Today she used some of Tony's leftover wormless compost to fertilize her garden, and she planted her sadness in it. "Happy to hear it," Beth says, staring at her husband with analytical eyes. The two of them are wrinkled and sun-worn, so unlike the slippery, taut worms that Tony sells. "How many buckets did you sell today?" Beth asks Tony, taking another bite. "Three," Tony replies happily, his face going pink. "She sure sells them fast," Beth says, shaking her head. It makes her sad to think of bucketful after bucketful of worms being gutted and ripped apart and drowned. "She's a great saleswoman," Tony says proudly. "A good business partner." Tony does not feel guilty. He appreciates that both Sue and the village like his worms. If Beth ever mentioned her feelings, Tony would be annoyed. Beth's sadness grows white tuberous roots out in the garden. "She stays busy," Beth mutters. "She bites down hard and her teeth hit her fork." "Not today," Tony waves his hand in the air. "It was just her and I in the store for a while." His blush deepens and he takes another bite. Husband and wife eat in silence for a few minutes. I think I'll end it there. Keep the suspense.
Thanks, Madison. Next up, we have Gerry with his short story, wonderful short story, Make Me an Angel. A hard-living grandfather gets a shot at reconciliation. Thanks for joining us, Gerry. Take it away.
Thank you, Robert. And here we go. Make me an angel. Rocky was always home for breakfast. Today, a little after 6, he padded up the ramp and out of the hole, circled the room, and ended up by the bed. He got up on his hind legs, mewed and growled until Lenny woke up and said, "Hold your frickin' horses." Lenny kicked the sleeping bag down, rolled to the edge of the mattress, feet dangling. Rocky gave his toes a wet-nosed sniff, and Lenny kicked him back, said, "Frickin' A, don't you see I'm coming?" He reached a blunt down from the matchbox on the wooden crate, lit it, and tossed the lighter down. Took a deep toke, blew the smoke at Rocky, who stared up at him through the haze. Lenny slid off the bed, walked out of the alcove onto the main part of the trailer, stood at the counter, a piece of plywood on sawhorses, reached for the bottle of coffee brandy, opened it and took a swig, swallowed, and then puffed on the joint, said, "Okay, bro, let's get this party started." Rocky, following 3 feet behind, mewed, eyes black and beady in the black-brown mask. At that moment, not for the first time, the raccoon's mask reminded Lenny of when he and Troy were rolling dealers in the 80s. 4 a.m., the witching hour, they called it. Black balaclavas and hoodies, black gloves, Troy with the sawed-off 12-gauge, Lenny with the 44 mag. Doors kicked in, girlfriends screaming, guys reaching for their guns, always a second too late. Troy with the shotgun muzzle pressed against a guy's forehead, the guy being brave, but only for a moment to save face. And then the cash and the drugs from under a kid's bed, back of a closet, dug out of a hidey hole in the floor. Out the door, truck blasting down the road, a left and a right, Troy doing a quick count in the passenger seat. Always at least a few hundred, once 8 grand and change. 50-50 split. 10 minutes out, them high-fiving free and clear because they hadn't been followed. And who were drug dealers going to call? The cops? Which one chick actually did. 911 after her boyfriend got his pants on and ran out the door barefoot, thinking he could catch them, at least fire a few rounds into the back of the truck. A deputy, bored and parked nearby when the call came in, passed their oncoming pickup, turned around and chased them down, lights flashing, Lenny pulling over, figuring he could talk his way out of it. Yes, sir. No, sir. Just going to work, sir. We milk cows up at Dusty's. But the deputy, who'd kicked around, being demoted and fired, popping back up like whack-a-mole, remembered Troy from when he stole a skidder in Waldo County, knew he wouldn't milk cows if his life depended on it. Then the cop spotted the butt of the shotgun sticking out from under the seat, drew on them, called for backup, and that, Lenny told Rocky, was all she wrote. Breakfast was always the same, sliced apples and peanut butter, half a can of tuna, all from the food pantry, where Lenny chatted up the church ladies. Rocky licked the peanut butter off the apples, moved on to the tuna, went back to the apples, which he chewed very precisely. Then he licked his paws like a cat, gave a little purr, and shuffled to his place under the stuffed chair, his fluffy, banded tail the last thing Lenny saw. Rocky would sleep all day, come out for a snack, then pat his way down the ramp and out of the trailer, the night still young. That morning, Lenny pulled on his jeans, boots, a sweatshirt that said Sturgis, South Dakota. He went outside into the low sun, felt the cool of mid-May, dew coating the grass, the new leaves in the blackberry brambles, the seat of his bike, a stripped-down flat black 72 Electric Glide. He untied a bandana from the handlebars and wiped the seat, climbed on, turned the key and started the motor, the bike vibrating as the big banger rumbled. Lenny gave it a rev, straight pipes blaring like trumpets, gripped the mini apes, admired his own silver and turquoise, rings in a bracelet he picked up out west, and put the bike in gear. He rolled down the path between rusted bike frames, engine blocks, a wrecked Dodge pickup, the windshield cracked where Beefy Belanger's head had hit it. The path wound through parts and pallets, made a wide circle through the weeds and brush. Lenny rolled slowly along the track, hit second gear once, then coasted back to the parking spot, shut off the motor. With his license suspended indefinitely, his ride was done. As he got off the bike, he heard the phone ring inside the trailer. Lenny walked deliberately back inside, found the phone, a red trim line he'd picked up at the dump, under a scattering of books and papers, yellowed catalogs from a defunct trapping supply company, once a competitor to L.L. Bean. Very cool. He cleared them aside, knocked the receiver out of its base, picked it up. Yeah? Hey, Dad. The boy. Lenny reached for the brandy, took another swig, put the bottle down, and picked up the phone. Took a breath, said, I'm sorry. Knew it was coming and beat him to it. A pause. Me too, the boy said. Lenny actually had to choke back some kind of happy sadness, and for a few seconds, he couldn't speak. I think that's enough for now.
Thank you, Gerry. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Next up, Art. Art Dingley.
There we go.
Art, which one are you reading from?
I'm going to read 2 pages from Decade.
A vacation in Mexico goes very wrong. And very right.
Yes. And because this is a fairly long story, and these 2 pages are excerpted from the middle of the story, a little context. The setting of the story is 1979, and a group of 20-somethings, friends and acquaintances, have traveled to Cancun, Mexico for a vacation. Cancun is a much different place, as you can imagine, in 1979 than it is today. Two of that group have become disgusted with the others and have struck out on a vacation of their own design. The complexifier is that these two are married, just not to each other. And so at the point I want to begin reading, they've taken the ferry boat from Puerto Morales to the island of Cozumel, where their vacation begins. They crossed the waterfront drive and passed Las Palmas restaurant, making a circuit of the shops around the central square with its big white statue of a nursing mother. They bought dark Cuban cigars and white sun visors with cartoon iguanas holding margaritas. In a leafy courtyard with 3 tables, the kind of restaurant which appears everywhere at noon in Cozumel, they had conch ceviche and lemonade and smoked their cigars. Everyone seems to have a scooter. We should rent one, he said, to see the island. The rental shop owner spoke good English, and the paperwork was brief. He read the fine print, which appeared to make them personally liable for any misfortune. She walked once around the Vespa, sat down on its vinyl seat, and coaxed it to life. I used to ride, she said. He got on behind, and there was just enough room. Hold on. He put one arm around her waist, and it rested on her little roll of belly fat, her left breast heavy on his hand. Out on the seaside boulevard, he formed himself around the soft, scorching backside of her when she hit the gas. Once they were up to speed, he moved back to let their shirts dry in the fiery wind. They rode south, far past the dive resorts and big hotels. At Chankanab Lagoon, they rented snorkel gear from a man whose shop was an impossibly rusted pickup truck. They swam in their clothes and drifted over barracuda, blue tang, parrotfish, black urchins, and schools of bright yellow jacks. The sand was so white, the light seemed to come from every direction. In those days, there was not so much at Chankanab. They sat in the thatch roof bar drinking pina coladas and cored out pineapples. It's 2:00, he said. We should go. The road swung around the southern tip of Cozumel, and the windward ocean appeared in jungle gaps. There were parrots in the trees and iguanas in the rocks. The road turned north, and they traveled along deserted iron shore with the Gulf wind hard on their right, cactus fields on the left. Ahead was a public house advertised as the Iguana Bar on a plywood sign leaning against the concrete steps. There were 2 rental jeeps and a dog, which might well have been dead, in the yellow dirt lot. Let's stop and stretch, she said. The Iguana Bar was built of rusted corrugated sheet metal badly fastened to palm logs. It consisted of 2 buildings, a smaller one with restrooms and a much larger one with a bar, kitchen, and rooms to rent. The buildings were joined by a thatch roof. When you came up the steps between them, you were looking right out at the beach. There was a thundering turquoise surf. The deserted beach stretched into the distance. The menu, hand-painted on boards over the bar, was problematic, but he opined that pescado and taro frito might be whole fried fish. This turned out to be the case, and their fish came missing only the innards, with tortillas, rice, and beans. They sat at their plastic table, drinking Coronas for some time after the food was gone. She excused herself and was gone for a bit. When she returned, it occurred to him, watching her walk, that she had better be able to drive drunk. They took a stroll on the beach. Foam welled and receded around their ankles. The Iguana Bar was hundreds of yards away when the length of his shadow gave him a start. It's 5:30, he said. We still have to return the bike and make the boat. It's okay, she said. We can do that tomorrow. We have a room. She showed him the room. It was at the far end of the larger building and opened right onto the beach. Some time ago, the door had been painted red. In the room were odds and ends of furniture, a bureau, a table, a full-size bed. The linen was clean. The generator went off at 9, she said, but there was a kerosene lamp. He struck a match, lit the lamp, and replaced the chimney. She switched off the electric light, and just at that moment, a wall of tropical rain hit the metal roof with a clatter and a hiss. There was gusting wind. If they had been inclined to fall in love, this would have been the time and place for it.
Thank you, Art. Next up, we have Kaylie Borden O'Brien. Oh, I'm supposed to read your blurb. Sorry, Kaylie. To Dust, sisters reunite in their primal landscape. Welcome, Kaylie.
Thank you. So, like Art, I'm going to read from the middle of my story. So, for some background, the story concerns two sisters, one of whom has always lived in the place she was born, one of whom moved away as soon as she could, who are back together for their mother's funeral. There was a fire off over the horizon, invisible save for its glow, and the low clouds were tinged with ashes of roses. It was almost enough light to see by as we shoveled the same dirt we dug that morning from the ground into the back of the Isuzu. Jean had brought a lantern anyway. My blisters reopened, but I was past caring. Jean wordlessly handed me the bottle of Bombay Sapphire she'd grabbed from the back wall of the end. It was full. We needed it emptied and filled with our mother's ashes by noon for the service. I took a pull. So did she, even though Jean never drank. The digging took on a new rhythm, trance-like, like dancing. Our shovels flew in the half-light, and we kept stopping to drink. I don't know who started giggling first, but before I realized the pile was gone, and we were both collapsed on the tarp, looking over into the perfect blackness of the 4-foot hole. I miss her, Jean said quietly, on the end of a laugh. I think you said goodbye to her a long time ago, and that's okay, but I miss her. I chewed on that for a moment. She rarely wrote me back, I whispered into the dark. Jean looked over to look at me. Her eyes were dry. Nothing hurt Jean too badly. I think she thought it was just a matter of time before you stopped writing too. A clue then. She was also talking about our 3 sisters who must have written also, and who must have stopped. This made me angry, not at Mom or Jean, but at them, whoever and wherever they were. What would they even look like now? All I could picture was the 3 darker blue rectangles on the wall. I felt the tears squeezing out. Jean was speaking again. I'm holding off on the obit until the day after tomorrow, after the service. I don't want them to try and make it, have to drop everything and fly out here. They'll find out eventually. You think they would? Try to get here, I mean? She met my gaze. You did. I looked at Jean, and Jean looked at me. I was thinking about all the times she'd emailed me back, signing love, Mom and me, in block capitals, of the birthday cards containing a $20 bill, as if I were still a child, and my room upstairs kept free of boxes and clutter, unlike the other girls. Jean hadn't given up on me. I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you, Kaylie. What I like about all these readings is everyone has read something so compelling that it makes you want to run back to the story and read it. I kind of know how this is going to end, but it makes you want to read it again, that's for sure. So thank you. All right, next up we have Eleanor
Okay, thank
with,
you, Robert. Oh,
yeah, let me read your little start. Struck, siblings, and a force of nature.
hey, thanks.
Take it away.
So I'm reading from the middle too. So a brother and sister have recently moved from Hawaii to Colorado with their parents, and because of their father's job. And it's summer, they're depressed, it's muggy, and their mother's thrown them out of the house and said, get out of here and get some fresh air. So they take their bikes and ride them to a reservoir, and there they rent a boat and a rowboat, and while they're in the boat, they get struck by lightning. So I won't be reading that part, but I'll read what happens just after that. We ended up at the ER in Boulder. In the ambulance, I turned my head and saw a black gash where the short sleeve of my blouse had parted, as though a deathly finger had run down my arm. I didn't yet know that the blood vessels there had burst, leaving behind a pattern like lightning itself. I was unaware that the necklace I'd put on that morning had melted into my neck. I thought Vincent was dead. I didn't ask. I just knew. Lightning can heat the air to 27,000 degrees centigrade. That's 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. It can cook the brain and sear the lungs. It can stop the heart. It can destroy eardrums and eyes. Long term, it can do other things that I didn't know about then. The only thing I cared about was what my parents would do when they found out that Vincent was dead. Weirdly, I wondered if I would still be allowed to stay in the family if Vincent was gone. The rental guy must have called the number we'd given him. When our parents appeared at the hospital, I knew I had to tell them about our parents, but as long as they didn't know, I knew I had to tell them about Vincent, but as long as they didn't know, our family was still whole. My mother rushed toward me and stopped, afraid to touch me when she saw the black gash. My father hung back too. I spoke but heard nothing coming out of my mouth, just silent words vibrating in my throat. I told them, finally, about Vincent, tears leaking toward my ears. I might be dead too. I wasn't sure, I said. My mother shook her head violently. I looked at her mouth. I thought she said, Vincent. Then I thought she said, can you hear me? My father moved closer, trying to make me understand. His mouth contorted into clowns of words, mouth open so wide I could see his amalgam fillings. My mother dug through her purse. She pulled out a pen and wrote on the back of her hand, don't worry. But then she fell apart and wept uncontrollably. Where is he? I asked. My mother pointed down the hall. She touched my hand carefully, squeezed the 2 middle fingers. I had an overwhelming desire to sleep. Everything was blank after this. Life returned, sort of. My hearing partially returned in one ear, leaving a strange, echoey sound inside my head. I visited Vincent down the hall. He stared at the ceiling a lot. Once I read about this guy who was struck by lightning, he told me. He'd never touched a piano before, and he became this genius player. That could happen, you know. He paused. Do you think that weird thing on your arm will ever go away? What's it called? I didn't answer him. The tree-like pattern where lightning damaged the capillaries under my skin made me want to cry. It was rust red, branching out in all directions, like pictures of what trees look like when dinosaurs walked the earth. We were released from the hospital after a bunch of tests and endless visits from curious medical students and residents. In time, our injuries began to heal, Vincent's more quickly than mine. At least that's what we thought. He had his vision back. My hearing returned more slowly. The doctor said that the shock wave had led to an acoustic rupture of the tympanic membranes, more serious in my right ear than my left. Because I was young and healthy, they were optimistic that I would get most, if not all, of my hearing back. Does your brain feel different? Vincent asked me one day. I had to think about it. I felt emptied out, scorched. I didn't smell right to myself. I was frightened, as though the connection between past and future had been severed. Vincent was the only person I could bear to be around. I don't know. Yes, it feels different, but I can't explain it. He looked into the distance. You know what freaks me out? Moth holes. What do moths do with the wool? Swallow it? Make nests for their young? What are you talking about? I'm talking about moths. Both of us changed. My left ear is still partially deaf. The Lichtenberg figure on my arm now looks like a faded botanical tattoo, but it no longer horrifies me. Vincent changed more profoundly. At first it was small things. Before the lightning struck, he had had an eccentric brain, but the strike set him teetering on the edge. It seemed for good. His words started coming out as though English were a second language. He still expected that he would become a piano-playing phenomenon, like the man he'd read about. He just needed the right piano. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Eleanor. Wonderful story. Really a joy to read. I think I might be next. So I'm going to read an excerpt from, I have 2 short stories in here. Waiting for the Rapture. And the description is for a traveling businessman, a lesson in tact, which is a great description. So just a little background. A businessman um, has a hard day of travel. It's in the evening, the week before a grueling week of business meetings. He's in a different town, and he is looking for a place to eat, and he finds a nice warm bistro. He's ordered a drink, and the barman has just put the drink in front of him. Carefully, he raised the brimming glass to his lips and drew another sip. Not so poorly executed after all, he decided. As he powered down his phone and slid it into his jacket pocket, he thought how good it was to have a night to settle in before the next few days of business. They would be tough. He lifted his glass again and took another deeper pull. Third time is the charm. The sudden settling in his body felt akin to a car's shift into a lower gear. He closed his eyes and sighed. Are you waiting for something? He opened his eyes. A waitress was leaned over on the other side of the bar, so only her dark hair and eyes were visible. Either he hadn't noticed her before, or she had slipped in when he closed his eyes. The rapture, he said. The sound of crunching ice that had been coming from behind the bar stopped. She was either annoyed or perplexed, he couldn't tell. He guessed she was trying to decide if he was a religious zealot or just being glib. She straightened and set an ice-filled glass on the bar. The ice clinked as it settled against the angled interior of the tumbler. Rising bubbles captured and carried the rose-colored light filtering in through the window behind her. The waitress tipped her head sideways and frowned. Are you really? To him, it was an offhand comment. He hadn't even been sure why he said it, the rapture. No, I should have said I'm waiting for a Caesar salad or some butter for my bread. She nodded toward the bar. But you don't have any bread. Well, that's true. Do you want some bread? He shook his head. No, not really. But you want a Caesar, right? Yeah, I just ordered one with extra anchovies, he added, smiling. Yeah, I heard that. She lifted the glass to her lips, sipped, then set the glass back on the bar. The rapture, she repeated. Why did you say that? He shrugged. I guess it's because I'm in the South. Where are you from? Up north? She turned her head and looked at him sideways. That makes a difference? We don't have the rapture up north. Not like in the South. She narrowed her eyes. I can't tell if you're being serious. He raised his eyebrows, shrugged, and took another sip of his drink. Oh, I'm a very serious person. Maybe he was flirting with her. Maybe she was flirting back. He didn't think so. She was probably in her late 20s. That would make her half his age. So everyone in the South believes in the rapture, she said, but not in the North. Do I have that right? Well, not as much as the South, he smiled, continuing what he thought was a game. After several seconds, she said, You're very mysterious. He held up a hand in front of his face and fanned out his fingers. Don't do that, she winced, shaking her head. That's not mysterious, it's just weird. He let his hand fall and make its way back to the stem of his cocktail glass, much like a drowning man finds refuge on a shore. But he felt flattered that she at least found him mysterious, which, in his mind, translated to interesting. And I think I'll stop there. Gillian, would you like to go next?
Sure, I would be glad to go next. And I think the blurb from this one was a bedroom farce in the age of exploration. And I'm starting from the beginning, but I will add a tiny bit of introduction because it takes a little while to figure out where and when this is happening. It takes place in Portugal, in just past the apex of the Spanish Inquisition, which I bet you weren't expecting. And this is from the point of view of a nice young guy who is secretly Jewish in a regime that does not allow that kind of thing. In the weeks of my fame, late in the summer of 1501, a court portraitist painted my face. An assistant was supposed to summon me back and fill in my hair, torso, and hands, maybe add a table artfully strewn with nutmegs and ginger roots, but no one ever did. I'll tell you, it's an unholy sensation for a man to look on himself so clearly. Puddles and window panes had never quite shown me those sunburned cheeks and like a pair of stubby wings, my multifaceted nose and big donkey teeth, all of it emerging from the whiteness like an ill-favored pharaohess rising from her milk bath. I'd almost forgotten that aborted painting, but lately it's been turning up in my daydreams, me staring back from the great blank mystery into which we'll all eventually disappear, as if anyone needs an omen of the inevitable. When I think back on that time, I remember the stories I heard and told on the long night watches aboard the creaky, rat-haunted Sombra. They were stories grown men would never dream of uttering, much less drinking in with thirsty ears, if we hadn't been so far from the known world and so uncertain of ever returning to it. Me, I knew for a fact I never would. The game began in an access of group nostalgia in a drizzly mist before dawn with earliest memories. And he talks about his parents accidentally giving his birthday present to his mean sister. Then the next night is second earliest memories. And he talks about getting swarmed by ants. The night after that, I came prepared with an assortment of third earliest memories, a real one plus some later in life spares in case someone else helped slaughter a chicken. But the game changed to first time with a woman. Now, most of the men on the ship were either leathery old coots or middle-aged men well on their way to coothood. They were the thin whey of this seafaring population, the cheese having been recruited or dragooned for earlier, better provisioned, and more hopeful expeditions. I definitely had the most teeth of anyone aboard, and that included our deranged, foul-smelling captain, a man who'd shriek obscenities at unseen persons, listen for replies with a cocked head, and settle the argument with a nod and a hearty "fuck 'em." Then he'd command one of us to do something uncomfortable, tedious, and half the time unnecessary. Refold the spare mainsail the other way out? I captain. Repaint the figurehead's nipples? I captain. But I'm wandering. My point was that for most of my shipmates, erotic initiation was ancient history. Well, for me, it was fresh and raw and heartbreaking. It was what had thrust me into their company, sent me off to lands no Christian, Moor, or Jew had ever laid eyes on, and made me the first poor son of a bitch off the boat. It's what would make me famous.
Thank you. Lots of wonderful reactions. Thank you all for reacting to the readings here. So, Gillian, nice that we ended with you because you're going to talk now about the nature of happy endings. We're all going to talk about the nature of happy endings. And what was so amazing, my observation about this wonderful anthology is that all of the happy endings were so different. It's like, what does a happy ending really mean? So I'd like to lead the conversation with that. And I know some of the writers have questions for some of the other writers. So I think we just jump in and we've got 15 minutes to have a conversation about all this stuff.
So what makes a happy ending? Is that okay?
Yeah, let's start there.
I thought I knew when I sent out the call for submissions. I knew it was the main character getting what he or she or they wanted in the end or something like it. But really what came in and what became very apparent to me as they arrived was that there were all kinds of happy endings, and a lot of them are characters getting something far different from what they want. And some of the stories actually remind me of something my mom said to me when I was little, and I was very afraid of a lot of superstitions, and I was very afraid of bad things happen in threes. So whenever something bad would happen, I was terrified for waiting for the next two. And she said, yeah, bad things happen in threes if you wait for two more and then stop counting. She was a liberation rationalist, my mother. And so a lot of these stories are happy endings in that they stop the action at a happy moment. And when Agnes talked about her son Nick's story, and she said, I don't know where this was going, but this is a happy moment. And so this story can be a story with a happy ending because of where it chooses to end.
There's something satisfactory. It's like satisfaction is a part of that, but it's not necessarily happily ever after. It doesn't have that sort of cloying residual effect that we had from fairy tales from childhood. Some of them were bittersweet and quite beautiful. There's some happy endings that are quite bittersweet, sad, but satisfying and uplifting to some degree. I think this anthology has a little bit of all of this. Does anybody else on our panel of readers or writers want to contribute? Art, I think you had something to either ask.
Yeah, well, I agree with Gillian that the moment of the ending matters in terms of whether it's a happy ending, but it has to have hope that things will be good or things will be better. That matters a lot too. So a story can end on an ambiguous or almost sad note if it also expresses hope that things will improve, that there can be happiness, that there can be a happy ending. I think either of those works.
Yeah, happy ending or a relief from the bad things. There's a death, and one of these stories ends in a death. I won't ruin it for you. But it is such an ending on a high note, and there's a character who we learn makes mistake after mistake after mistake, and if it's gonna happen sometime, this is the time for it to happen. And it's one of my favorite happy endings, but I would never have told you before I read this that's it's how I would map out a happy ending, a sample for the call for submissions. Eleanor?
Eleanor.
Yeah, hi. Your call for submissions made me start thinking about happy endings in a way that I hadn't thought about them before, and I realize that I don't really believe in happy endings, probably because I'm or not pure happy endings, not unadulterated happy endings. Probably I'm jaded enough to know that if it starts happy, then it may diminish somehow or it may complicate itself. But that doesn't mean necessarily that it's not a satisfying ending. But I realize it's not purely happy. And I picked up Chekhov last night, just thinking about what we're doing tonight. And I used to like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky's best of all the Russians, but Chekhov's become my favorite. And I read a short story last night called Easter Night. I don't know whether any of you have read it, but it's just a gorgeous story. And it's bittersweet in its own way, but it's so satisfying at the end, and beautiful. There is a death in it, not right at the very ending, but what it moves toward is this point of stillness and a kind of spaciousness that just overtakes you as a reader. And I realized last night that's probably a definition for me of what a happy ending is creating that spaciousness in a reader. And I think for Chekhov, he didn't tend to have his endings didn't tend to have things wrapped up in the ways that a lot of earlier than him writers did. I think he tended to he tended to resolve things in terms of readers more than his own characters. And that's been really interesting to me about his work, that that spaciousness is what creates happiness or fulfillment in an ending. And that's so. And I think this collection, as you said, has huge number of different kinds of endings, but I think when I think of the stories here, they all have that sort of point of stillness and that spacious quality by the end.
The idea of wrapping things up in a tidy bow is where I went immediately with the happy ending, that this would be an anthology of tidy bows. And it's not at all. It's that spaciousness that you're talking about, which makes every story really unique and interesting. It's very is very expansive and satisfying in their own way. Some of them are happy for now endings, and but there's a sense of going on beyond the end. I love the way you tied up your story. I mean, it would be really wonderful if we could all just read our last lines, because I think there are so many great last paragraphs and last lines. We're not going to do that. So, um, anybody else? Did we have questions for one another? Anybody else want to talk about their idea of what a happy ending was or what they expected when they read the anthology? And of course, anybody from the audience that wants to contribute, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
I had a question for Art. I was wondering, I reread your story last night, and I don't want to spoil it for other people, but the two people in the story who are having like a relationship who are not married to one another, their relationship doesn't really go the way that the reader would expect it to go. They end up, I don't know how I'm going to ask this question without spoiling it, but they part ways in an unexpected way at the end of the story. And I was just curious if, when you were writing the story, if you had thought that it was going to go that way from the start, or if that just seemed like the most profound ending was for them to part ways, or what your process was.
Um, I saw the ending from the beginning, and so I wrote it with that aspect of the relationship in mind consciously, because the story begins, remember, with the character as a much older man seeing the woman's paintings and being reminded in a very flashbulb sort of way of all of the rest of the story. And so, in a way, the story is about how things circle around. If you live long enough in this world, things circle around in unexpected ways and bite you when you least expect it. And in a way, that's on one level, that's what the story is really about.
Art, did you have another question for somebody? I thought
Well, I
earlier.
have a question. I have a question for Kaylie, uh, and that is Kaylie still with us? I don't see her. There she is. Hi there. Um, According to your bio, you've lived in lots of places. And I wonder if you spent your formative years, for lack of a better descriptor, in a particular geographic place. And if you did, does that sense of place sort of inform not just your writing, but the stories you tell yourself about who you are? That's very true of me. And so I wonder if that's something you might experience as well.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting question because, I've lived in Maine for 9 years now. I very much consider this to be my home, but when it comes to writing fiction, I really find myself drawn to like the other places and very, very un-Maine-like places because they're where the stories happen. Like Maine for me right now is where real life is happening, but I went to a lot of funerals as a child in the sagebrush steppe of southern Idaho, where I grew up, and have family across the West and Midwest. So just kind of the wide open spaces of it all has always seemed really gothic to me, but also very underrepresented in fiction. So that's kind of where my creative muse lives right now. I'm not sure if it's always going to be there, but you're absolutely right that there's a sense of place that I find interesting, inspiring, but I think it's interesting and inspiring because I don't live there anymore.
Well, just as a kind of follow-up, you don't live there anymore, and it was a big part of your life at one time. How do you think about those years in terms of who you are as a person? What do you carry? Do you carry any of that with you on a personal level? I mean, we tell ourselves stories about who we are, right? We understand who we are based on things we believe about ourselves to be true or to be important. So, is any of that geography or social geography of Idaho, part of who you are, not just how you write?
Oh, absolutely. And if we want to take it both to a psychological level and my story, the two sisters, Ellen and Jean, are maybe two different parts of my psyche, where one is very tied literally and figuratively to the place where she grew up, finds kind of family ties and her identity there to be a part of what makes her her. And I definitely feel that. But then there's also Ellen, who left, and her part of her identity when she goes home is, oh, the one who's doing something different. So holding those two things in contrast is, you know, part of myself, and I think also part of a lot of stories I tell.
Yeah, well, thank you.
This is a question for both Art and Kaylie and anybody else who's wandered around and lived in many places. But I just thinking of my own life and the wandering I've done. I can't write about places very easily that I'm living in right now. It's much easier. I lived in Botswana for 4 very intense years, and it took me 25 years before I was ready to write about that place. And that's been true of other places where I've lived, India and the big island of Hawaii. And I'm just curious whether others of you have the same experience, and it doesn't even have to be place-based. How long does it take before you can really extract something meaningful or make sense of a period of your life before you can write about it? And I'm curious for other people what that time frame is like.
I think at least a decade for me, which means that I'm just starting to get into the really good stuff.
Yeah, I think that
definitely.
you have to live a long time, as I have, to be able to make complete sense out of earlier periods of your life in a way that you can articulate. On another level, I feel um, very much not just influenced, but defined by my childhood, the place where I grew up from birth to age 12, 13. It's a geographic landscape, but it's a social landscape. And I internalized both of those very strongly. And I've always been very proud of that heritage. I felt privileged as a child living in a town of 800 people. Um, I felt very blessed to be there. I felt badly for people who lived in other places. And never once have I been ashamed of growing up as a kid whose prized possession was a bicycle in a town of fewer, on a side of the river that had fewer people than the middle school I went to when I moved to Portland. Um, that's a little different than the other aspect of what you asked, which is how do you know when you're able to write about a period of your life that's past, even though it was powerful? How do you articulate it? That's a different thing, but anyway, for what it's worth.
Thank you, Art, and thank you for that question, Eleanor. If anybody else wants to comment, there is a comment in the comment section, but if anybody wants to comment specifically on Eleanor's question, let's do that now before we move on to the comment.
I would just add that some time, it might be good to have some time to forget. So it leaves you a little room to imagine and make the story better as a story than real life was. So I think some composting has to happen.
I like the way you just said that, the composting. I think I think experiences can sometimes settle inside of us like seeds and wait, and sometimes inspiration causes them to sprout, the compost causes them to super sprout very quickly. But sometimes experiences from long ago are so settled in and then suddenly they'll germinate and it's like, oh, whoa. That's a really interesting, inspiring thing that happened. I'm going to write about it now. So I guess for me personally, it's not like, okay, yeah, it's gonna happen in the future. It's more of like it happens when it happens, and you know, waiting for the rapture. I wrote that and the other story, pretty much right as soon as the call came out. I didn't even know what was going on. But anyway, I do want to read Lynette Johnson's comment. Your readings and conversation are wonderful to listen to. Hearing your words in your own voices brings the stories to life. I totally agree with that in an inspiring way. Have you considered turning this into Positivity Bias, the podcast? This would be a great format for people to connect with and expand, reach for future anthology stories, etc. I love the idea of a Positivity Bias podcast, actually talking about the nature of happy endings, happy experiences, happy for now experiences, happily ever after experiences, or bittersweet moments. Who's going to do that? Who's going to create the podcast? And Gillian, you up for it? Let's do it.
I think some stranger things have happened. Thanks, Lynette.
So we're wrapping up. We're at about an hour. I have a feeling we could continue talking forever. Do any of the other writers have a question or a pressing comment they'd like to make before we wrap this up tonight?
I just want to thank everybody for sending, their babies in to this anthology. It's this scary thing, and some of you took treasures out of your vault and sent them in, and some people wrote things fresh, and some people took a story that was whole and finished and then worked on it and gave it a happy ending that it didn't have before. And those are all wonderful, heroic things to do, and I'm so grateful to you for doing it. Thank you. And it's so much fun to meet you.
Thank you for being a wonderful editor and so wonderful to work with throughout this experience. And I just want to thank every one of the authors here tonight for joining in and reading from their short stories, and people in the audience for tagging along tonight on a very cold night here in Maine. So thank you very much. And of course, thank you to Agnes Bushell and Jim Bushell for Littoral Books and publishing this wonderful anthology, which is available on littoralbooks.com. Most of us probably have a copy, but before we leave, I'll go ahead and put the address in the chat, and you can buy a wonderful copy of the book. All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This concludes the Not Podcast.
Thanks, Rod.
Thank you.
Robert.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Agnes and
Robert.
Jillian, too.
My pleasure.